Negotiating the maximum terms possible from your suppliers has got to be one of the best ways that any size business can increase its cash flow. And the best bit about payment terms is it's completely free. Your suppliers obviously never charge you any interest or application fees or anything like that for negotiating extra payment terms from them. So especially in 2024 at the moment, when interest rates, if you went and got a commercial loan, at the very best commercial loans, you'd be looking at an 8% interest rate at the moment. But if you don't have a particularly strong credit history or you're deemed high risk, then you could even be looking at potentially up to 15% interest at the moment. So getting free credit from your suppliers should be like 101 in business, and every single small business needs to maximise this as much as possible. Now, as well as putting instant cash into your business for free, another benefit of this is that when you improve the cash flow in your business, that obviously comes out in your financial statements. And when people like credit institutions, so banks or lenders, and also suppliers are making decisions about whether your company can or can't get financing, and often the interest rate that you pay is based off of your financial accounts. So if your financial accounts display a stronger cash flow position, then you're going to have a better credit rating, and therefore that gives you access to more finance products and normally a better interest rate too. So thinking about suppliers, if you work with suppliers that run a credit check on your business when you ask them for credit, then they're more likely to say yes if you've got a better credit rating. And therefore this is like a cyclical process. If you can improve your cash flow on your financial statements, you're more likely to get credit, which means you can improve the cash flow on your financial statements and you're more likely to get credit. So if you can just make small incremental changes, this can have quite a significant long-term impact on your business. So we've covered why it's really important for businesses to maximise the credit that they receive from their suppliers, but how can you go about doing that? And that's what we're going to have a deep dive into today. So the first thing I would suggest, in my experience working with most small businesses, is that they just need to make small incremental changes as the first step. So in the first instance, my recommendation is that you take all of your payments that you normally do, and firstly, best practice is to do them bi-weekly or monthly. So when I've worked in most businesses, we do a payment run in the middle of the month, normally around the 15th, and then we'll do a payment run at the end of the month. And the vast majority of invoices we always pay at the end of the month, and they are the what I would call standard payment terms. So standard payment terms generally in the UK are accepted to be 30 days end of month. So if you're not on end of month payment terms, then you want to try and negotiate that as the first starting point with your suppliers. So assuming you do, say you do your payment run on the 15th of the month, then my first tip is that you just simply start doing that payment run on the 16th of the month. And then the next month you move it to the 17th and then the 18th and so on and so on. And you just keep pushing that payment date further and further out. Now, that's incredibly unlikely to be noticed by your customers. And the reason is that in my experience of working as a finance director and managing credit control teams where we were collecting, like 20, 30 million pounds a month, if a customer didn't pay us, one of the first questions that I would always ask the credit controllers is, what is their payment history like? So they would go and have a look at the system and see when what the payment habits of that customer had been previously. So if the customer normally pays us on the 6th of the month, and then sometimes the 7th and then the 8th, then in my mind that says to me the customer normally pays around the second week of every month. So if we're only on the 8th or 9th, I'm probably not going to be questioning that and chasing that customer just yet, because that seems in line with their normal habits. So that's why just moving that payment date by one day every month, by the time you get to the end of the year, you've got nearly 2 weeks worth of extra cash in your bank. And probably you can do that without upsetting any of your suppliers at all. So the first thing that I will mention before going on to some of these other areas is that you need to be mindful of the risk that you're exposing yourself to. So there's obviously a risk in terms of you could upset your suppliers by doing this, and they could actually reduce your payment terms, which is absolutely not what you want to do. So it's really important that you're in regular communication, particularly with your key suppliers, and that you have a relationship with them whereby they will talk to you about any problems rather than just putting you on stop or removing your credit limit. So you can manage the risk with your key suppliers that way. The second thing you need to be mindful of is that as the numbers get bigger in your business, the risk naturally gets bigger too. So if you took this earlier example whereby if you move the payment date by 1 day every month for a whole year, you would have increased the amount of money that you owe to your suppliers by nearly 2 weeks, so half a month's worth by the time you get to the end of the year. So you need to be mindful of that when you're reviewing your financials and particularly looking at your cash flow, because your payment runs are going to become larger values. And therefore, it's really important that you're managing the risk from a cash flow perspective, and that you're not looking at your bank balance and thinking that you've got lots of money in the business to spend and that you can continue to pay your suppliers. So once you've got a process for managing the risk and you can track the amount of money that you owe to your suppliers and you can get that plotted into a cash flow forecast, the first thing that I would recommend you do is you rehearse what you're going to say to your suppliers and how you're going to deliver it. Because there's a really fine line with this between giving the impression to the supplier that you really want this and that you kind of need this to continue to work with them, versus giving the supplier the impression that you might have cash flow difficulties in your business and that's why you're asking. If you accidentally give the supplier the impression that you've got cash flow difficulties, then there is actually the chance that the supplier will look at this and think, oh, this is now quite a risky customer to us, we should actually reduce their payment terms or reduce their credit limit. So that is obviously the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. So that's why you need to rehearse your message and be very clear on what you're going to say to your customer and how you're going to say it to your customer. Also, for that reason, I always recommend having these conversations with your suppliers in person or over the telephone or on a video call. I tend to think that emails feel very impersonal and tend to not hit the mark. The only time as a finance director that I've received emails from customers asking for extended payment terms would be when they have outsourced to one of these big corporate buying companies that will say, let us look at your supply chain and we'll cut out X percent, and they force rebates through and force extra payment terms through, and they're really not pleasant companies to deal with. So always try and do this in person. So the next thing that you need to do is you need to go through your list of suppliers and you need to prioritise which suppliers you're going to contact, because you've often got many in your business and you kind of want to pick off the quick wins but also the big wins. So the suppliers that you'll be looking at are the suppliers that you buy the most from and that you've had the longest relationship with, so you've got good payment history with them. And also, if there is some form of specialism in what they do, and they're much more likely to have like a smaller marketplace. So for example, like a pen supplier, you can just go and buy pens everywhere. So why are they going to give you payment terms? But if you had somebody that sold these really, niche pens with this specific type of pen colour that was completely bespoke to you, then you've got a much more of a partnership relationship with that supplier. They're much more likely to negotiate with you. So therefore, prioritise your customers and just start at the top of the list and then approach this periodically and deal with as many suppliers as you can at any time. So you've got to find a way to identify what's in it for your suppliers, basically. If somebody just comes to you and says, can I have extra payment terms? It's very natural to say, what's in it for me? Now, the most obvious thing to talk about with your suppliers is to talk about the growth, and it's mutual growth. So I would normally approach that by saying something along the lines of, we've got plans to grow the business. One of the things we need to do is to secure additional cash flow in the business to support that growth. If we can secure that extra cash flow, which you, supplier, are paying a part of here, then we can grow our business by 15% over the next 12 months, and that 15% extra work will be coming your way. So that's a really positive message to give to the supplier, and it's very clear what's in it for the supplier too. So that's a really good way of approaching this. Now, I would always recommend that you go into this prepared to negotiate. You don't want to sort of go in hard and fast with comments like, if we don't get this, we'll go to another supplier. You know, generally that doesn't get you what you want in this situation, and that it's a negotiation. So there's lots of different negotiating tactics. I tend to find that if you go in high, you'll be beaten down. So if, for example, you're on 30 days end of month at the moment and you ask the supplier for 60 days end of month, the chances of them saying yes to that are quite small. They're much more likely to come back with a counter offer of, say, 45 days, for example. So negotiate with them and be prepared to compromise on what you've asked for. But also, one thing, a tactic that I would use a lot with customers when they were asking me as a finance director for extra payment terms, is I would say to them, in the example where they've asked for 60 days but I've given them 45, I would say, look, let's do 45 days for the next 6 months. If you pay on time consistently and there are no issues, then we'll have a look again in 6 months' time to see if we can go to 60 days end of month if your financials support it. So if you don't get what you want now, make sure you agree a way that you can come back to it with your supplier and revisit it in the near future. So the final thing to give you a tip on is to be prepared to share your financial information with the supplier when you're requesting these extra payment terms. So when a supplier is making a decision about whether or not to give credit to you and what your credit limit should be, it's very likely that they will be using a platform such as CreditSafe or Dun & Bradstreet to run a credit check on your business. And the limitations of these credit check reports is that they're based off normally a lot of the information is based off your accounts that you file at Companies House every year. Most of the financial information published on Companies House at the moment will likely be for a year end that was in 2022, because most companies wouldn't have filed their 2023 year end accounts now. So my suggestion is that you have your management accounts available to share with the supplier, and that you actively offer them to the supplier to help them make their credit decision. You can redact certain information and summarise it as much as possible. You don't want to sort of give the crown jewels away to your supplier that gives them an indication of too much information about your business. So high level information such as sales, GP, your operating costs, your profitability is absolutely fine, just key numbers. But more importantly, give them a breakdown of your balance sheet so they can see your cash flow and they can see that your business is financially secure. So if you follow these processes, then really you should get some of your suppliers to give you extra payment terms, which means that your small business can hold on to more cash in your business on a day-to-day basis. So that will of course help you if you're having cash flow issues, but more importantly, if you're a business that's trying to grow, then having enough money in your business to support that growth is really, really important. So if you are thinking about growing, approaching your suppliers and having that conversation with them, a very positive conversation that says, in order to support our growth, could you please give us extra payment terms?